Super Mario RPG Legend of the Seven Stars was a cult hit. It had a small but passionate fan base, and Nintendo knew that it would be good to capitalize on that. So what did they do next? Well, an arts and crafts game. Enter the late 90s. Nintendo has their new console out the door, and Sony is really kicking their ass in the RPG department. What's their answer? Well, Earthbound 64, but we all know how that story went. So they needed another killer RPG out for the system. Paper Mario was born, though it wasn't always known as that. Before Square intervened, it was going to be Super Mario RPG 2, but with that name being dropped came another thing being changed. The art style went from isometric to totally 3D with papery characters, and thus Paper Mario was born. I'm sure you don't have to know any more than that to understand what makes Paper Mario unique aesthetically. In this department, I don't think it's ever really failed to deliver. The arts and crafts style is really nice to look at. Even on the Nintendo 64 where the sprites had to be compressed a ton, it still looks great. The soundtrack of the original Paper Mario plays in the Nintendo 64 sound font expertly as well. However, what many people praise these games for is the plot, and the first Paper Mario might be my favorite in that department. While later games would go bigger and bolder with their plot ideas, Paper Mario keeps it pretty simple and ends up being the definitive version of the Mario franchise's core conflict. Mario vs. Bowser over Princess Peach. The writing really carries it though, as do all the characters you meet along the way. Of all the Mario RPGs, this might be my favorite. The basic plot is compelling and the humor is phenomenal. Bowser being written here just like how he's written in Super Mario RPG is always great. Each individual chapter is pretty memorable too. You go around and help different people across the kingdom with their problems. My personal favorite, Shy Guy's Toy Box, does something pretty interesting. It visits a place that Mario games normally wouldn't. A toy box full of Shy Guys that turns out to be their lair? It's an interesting, ethereal, dreamlike pocket dimension that sort of harkens back to the Shy Guys being introduced in a dreamscape themselves. It's super neat, and the general guy fight at the end is peak goofy fun. There are a few other standouts as well. The invincible Tubba Blubba has you helping out ghosts who are literally getting devoured by an invincible beast. Learning his secrets and sneaking through his castle is such a great segment. Or how about the mystery of Dry Ruins, an adventure discovering a lost temple featuring your favorite Indiana Jones XP, Professor Colorado. Hell, a Star Spirit on Ice is fucking fantastic. A penguin murder mystery and then an interesting ice palace with terrifying music. Hot Times on Lava Island asks the question, yeah, but what if Mario went back to Yoshi's Island as an adult? Though it unfortunately doesn't take the concept as far as it could. You do meet Raphael Raven though, which is a really cool deep cut. Regardless, it's all great stuff. Despite this, there are a few scenarios I didn't gel with as much. Even though I love the Koopa Bros' parodies of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles almost as much as I love the Axum Rangers as parodies of Tokusatsu, storming Koopa Bros' Fortress is a pretty forgettable outing. Not even Bombette's adorable design can save it from just being a boring grassland that transitions into a fortress level. While I appreciate the different structure of Dark Days in Flower Fields, with it mainly being a trading quest between a bunch of different flowers, I don't think it really works all that well, especially since so many of the characters you meet here are so forgettable that I can't even list examples. Individual scenarios involving Mario aren't the only place that Paper Mario shines though. There's also Princess Peach's scenarios. In between chapters, you get to do stealth missions as Princess Peach. This game is my favorite interpretation of the princess as a character. She really feels like an actor with agency, and you get to see a lot of fun interactions between her and her friend Twink. She's constantly going behind Bowser's back and trying to find hints that might be able to help out Mario on his quest. It's a fun little side plot that breaks up the pacing a bit. Something that's often lauded about this game are its party members. Frankly, though they have really strong designs and fun movesets, I don't particularly care for them that much. With the exception of Goombario, who has loads of dialogue due to his role as the Tattler, most of them don't say or do a whole lot in the game's plot, which is disappointing to say the least. Character interactions are my favorite thing, and we don't get to see a whole lot of them in this game. Other than that, I think Paper Mario is pretty solid as far as Mario plots go. I definitely think it works better than Super Mario RPG in that department. I also think it works better than Super Mario RPG in the gameplay department as well. Paper Mario brings with it to the table an action command system that builds upon the ideas presented in Super Mario RPG. Button prompts feel more natural, and they extend beyond just the 4 face buttons. Sometimes you have to hit a specific part of an action command, other times you have to hold left to imitate swinging a hammer. I still don't think it's ideal, but it's definitely a more interesting take on the formula than the original Super Mario RPG was. Each party member having their own moveset is brought back too, but they're far more balanced in this instance, which is great to see. There's only one broken party member this time, not the baby Spark who can buff Mario to an absurd degree, but everyone else is pretty much the same. Exploration is also pretty fun, much like Super Mario RPG. Interacting with the world is just easier in 3D as opposed to an isometric perspective, and there's more interesting secrets to find. Yes, I think that party upgrade blocks are more interesting than Great Guy's Casino. I also just find the characters you meet while exploring more interesting than in Super Mario RPG. In Super Mario RPG, a lot of the characters you meet while exploring don't even have unique designs, but in this game we get secret bosses like Kenshi Koopa, who looks pretty distinct from other characters. The ending of Paper Mario is probably the best instance of any battle between Mario and Bowser we've ever seen. The game's opening is a close second, with Bowser completely wiping the floor with Mario and you feeling totally powerless against his invincibility. However, this finale builds upon the idea with Bowser becoming supercharged, and even a section where you use Twink as a party member briefly. Peach actually contributes by praying and creating the Peach Beam with her belief in Mario, which is a cool thematic way for her gameplay sections to complement the final section, even if I would have preferred her own segment of the boss fight. That's not even to mention the music, which is the best Bowser fight music that's ever been used in a game before. It's utterly dramatic and I love it. It's challenging, well, as challenging as a game as easy as Paper Mario can be, of course, and it's climactic. Everything has been building up to this one moment where you beat the shit out of Bowser on the roof. Oh, and then he explodes, which is cool. Paper Mario holds a similar place in my heart to Super Mario RPG. With that being said, despite only being about 4 years younger, I think the original Paper Mario holds up much better. The characters, even though they aren't as fleshed out as they could have been, actually exist, and the individual scenarios feel more naturally integrated into the plot. Maybe it's the lack of Nintendo and Squaresoft tug-of-war in the production, or maybe it's just a personal preference. Whatever the case, Paper Mario was my first RPG, and it's one of the many reasons I still play them today. I think it's perfect for beginners. However, you probably didn't come here to hear about Paper Mario 64. The general consensus on that game is pretty dismissive after all. It's considered good, but it's overshadowed by its successor. You came here to hear what I had to say about Paper Mario the 1000-Year Door. This game has been discussed and combed over by everyone on the internet, but mostly exclusively in the context of whether or not it might get a sequel, remake, reimagining, or whatever else. I don't see a lot of discussion of the game's content itself. It's often presumed to be a masterpiece. The 1000-Year Door, in many ways, is pretty great as well. It's probably my least played Paper Mario game, barring Color Splash, but that's more out of how hard it is to obtain and emulate than anything else. Its difficulty to emulate is mostly due to the fact that the graphics are so distinct with how they utilize the GameCube's bounding box. The 1000-Year Door is a large improvement on the presentation of the first game, and that's saying something because I love the way that game looks. Along with just having higher resolution sprites, the lighting is a lot moodier to reflect that this is a grittier game than its predecessor. It's got a dark and adventurous sense to the whole thing. Speaking of its mood, let's talk about the setting a bit. Rogueport and its surrounding area. The first game was contained in the Mushroom Kingdom, so there wasn't a whole lot different to talk about there from the typical Mario world building, but Rogueport is a grittier take on the Mario world and features a lot of interesting new areas for the player to explore. It's really neat to have a Mario town that's basically just an organized crime ring. There's literally just a scene where you see the Mafia beat the shit out of some guy in the background while you're talking to another character. Rogueport is anything but typical for Mario, and the strange creatures that inhabit the world illustrate this perfectly. I mean, what is Gus? We've never even seen that Mario species before or again. Of course, there are areas other than Rogueport as well, and a lot of chapters are dedicated just to them. A few of them are stinkers, like Castle and Dragon, which essentially just storming Koopa Bros Fortress, but with a dragon instead of TMNT parodies, or the Key to Pirates, which is very similar to Hot Hot Times on Lava Lava Island without the cool connection to Yoshi Island. However, I think several of these are really great. I've already talked a lot about how much I love 3 Days of Excess, and though I think it's really repetitive, 4 Pigs The Bell Tolls is aesthetically wonderful in how gloomy it is compared to anything else in the Mario world. It really reflects the year the game released in. The goth aesthetics of 2004 bleed into this chapter. It's like an Invader Zim episode. Everything feels so depressing, but it never stops feeling like Mario, which is a hard balance to strike. Plus, the twist where the villain of this chapter literally stole one of the letters from the name screen keyboard so you couldn't guess his name is pretty genius. I utterly adored the idea behind Of Glitz and Glory, a chapter entirely dedicated to battles and solving a seedy mystery behind the scenes. Sneaking through air ducts to overhear conversations is an image that always comes to mind when I think about this game. And I just love unconventionally structured RPG levels in general. Mario Shoots the Moon has a really clever setup. The X-Nauts have stolen one of the MacGuffins, which is a really unique way for things to play out in an RPG, and you have to retrieve it by storming the enemy's home base. The only game I've seen do something similar is Breath of Fire 1, and that's not a good game. There's also the Great Boggly Tree, which while visually distinct, is kind of just an annoying dungeon. You have to manage these little Pikmin, and it's a pain in the butt to get all of them from puzzle to puzzle safely. It's over fairly quickly though. All of this is connected by the story of the X-Nauts who have kidnapped Princess Peach and are currently trying to awaken a doomsday monster so they can take over the world, which really lends itself well to the adventurous atmosphere the game exudes. It feels very Indiana Jones-y. The X-Nauts are fine enough villains. I've never understood why they're as popular as they are. I mean, they have great designs and lots of presence in the plot, but not much else. Lord Crump is pretty funny though. I especially love when he addresses how sloppy his disguise is in Chapter 5 by talking to the audience. In between chapters, there are still interludes with other characters. Of course, Princess Peach's segments return with similar gameplay. They're mainly stealthing around the X-Naut base and occasionally talking to Tech. The supercomputer who runs the place. Tech is a really interesting character who's infatuated with Princess Peach and, before he sacrifices himself to help Mario, is used to talk about what it means to love. It's so interesting to see a robotic character have one of the most emotional arcs of the game. I particularly love when he dances with Peach using a hologram. The other set of interludes, Bowser's, are far from emotional and it's wonderful. The great writing that accompanied Bowser in Super Mario RPG and Paper Mario follows him here, and it doesn't disappoint. I just love seeing him interact with other characters. His gameplay style is mainly just platforming, and I'll be honest, his levels are pretty forgettable. Sure, they're funny pastiches of the original Super Mario Bros. With how they mimic the iconic level layouts with a Bowser coat of paint, but they're just that. And they almost feel like a Flash game from the early 2000s in some ways. Not terrible, but I wouldn't miss them if they were removed. Something this game improved on quite a bit from the original was the partners. While most of them are still not much to write home about, there are 2 in particular who stand out to me. First of all, there's Admiral Bobbery, an old bob-omb sailor whose wife died while he was out at sea, and you have to give him her final letter in order to convince him to join up with you and sail once again. It's a surprisingly emotionally resonant moment, and if Admiral Bobbery had been built on more after this, he'd be my favorite character in the game. Unfortunately, he isn't. The character that I think is the most well utilized is Vivian. Vivian is an interesting character in a lot of ways. For starters, she's the best trans character Nintendo has ever written. Her identity is only treated poorly by her sisters, who you beat the shit out of, which is awesome. Unfortunately, her transness wasn't transferred over to the English version. Not only that, she's the character with the most personal stakes in the plot. Her sisters directly work for the main villains, and she tags along specifically to fight back against the abuse that they put her through her whole life. You can encounter them several times throughout the story, so there's multiple moments where Vivian is relevant. A simple motivation like that goes a long way in making her so much more interesting than the other characters, especially since they simply don't have their own that connect to the plot in interesting ways. Like Koops is trying to be brave, I guess? Ms. Mouse, finds Mario attractive. I don't even remember what Admiral Bobbery is up to after this chapter. Vivian has a strong reason to stick around. Plus, she's just adorable. Let's finally get into the gameplay of TTYD. Honestly, there isn't a whole lot to say. It's mainly a refinement of the ideas presented in Paper Mario 64, which isn't a bad thing at all. Things are just generally smoother. Partners have their own HP now, which makes it so they can be useful for a longer period of time, as in the original if they got hit they were out of commission for the rest of the battle. Action commands themselves are better defined, and even moves like Goombella's Tattle have them now, which is interesting, though I don't really think it lines up with the actions very well. The only really annoying change is that there's now a stage hazard sort of system, where things can fall out of the metatextual stage that the battles take place on to hurt or help the party. It's completely random and not all fun to strategize around. Luckily, it's not super in the way, you can avoid it for the most part. Exploration is mostly the same, though the world itself is just a lot more fun to explore because of your new movement options. There are these really funny little abilities that you can get that allow Mario to fold himself up into things, be that a paper airplane or a paper boat. Despite them helping you access new areas, the demons who give them to you insist they're curses, which is a really cute touch. It's always been one of my favorite jokes in the game. I also like how you can go into the background sometimes. Not super often, but it's always cool when it does happen. The ending of the 1000-Year Door has always felt pretty bland compared to the rest of the game for me. I don't know what it is about it, it just never really sat right. You save the day, beat the evil Eldritch Abomination, get Peach back, trounce Bowser one more time. That's all well and good. It just feels really underwhelming for a game that has such high highs otherwise. It's not terrible by any means though, it's fine enough. I think the first Paper Mario's finale is much better though. The 1000-Year Door is the one that everyone knows and recognizes as the best one. It's commonly accepted as such, but frankly I prefer the original Paper Mario over it in most respects. Maybe that's just due to my own nostalgia, but I think the simplicity of the original game really works in its favor. With that being said, it's very close, and I think they're both incredibly good. I particularly like how the 1000-Year Door subverts your traditional expectations of RPGs quite frequently. Stuff like 3 Days of Excess and of Glitz and Glory are super interesting. I still don't think it's one of the greatest games of all time or anything, but I love it a lot. Super Paper Mario, to many people, is where things start to go downhill. Following a troubled development cycle that saw it hop from the GameCube to the Wii, the game released to a really mixed reception. I mean, look at it on YouTube and you'll see people praising it to high heaven, but at the time it was received pretty poorly. Even though I loved this game for a lot of my life, having replayed it recently, I can't say it was for good reason. Super Paper Mario is a mess. Sometimes it's a beautiful mess, but a Paper Mario 64 or the 1000-Year Door, it's not. It's a bit intimidating how messy it is, honestly. While the first two Paper Mario games opted for simpler plots with fun characters and interesting locations, Super Paper Mario swings for the fences and fails. Its plot is really convoluted in unnecessary ways. It's long and full of tons and tons of dialogue for no reason. What's really sad about this game is that the basic bones are really interesting. The overarching grand narrative of these two star-crossed lovers finding each other again, though rather melodramatic in its execution, is really touching in a lot of ways. The finale of this game really works for me, but it's not worth the amount of build-up. I'd love to give you some grand diatribe about each of the individual chapters and scenarios present in this game, but frankly, there just isn't a lot that sticks out to me that much. So much of it is just uninteresting. Of particular note in that department is the stuff involving the Cragnotes. Holy shit, it's so boring. What is it with caveman levels in RPGs? There's literally a part where you have to memorize a really long sequence of numbers for no reason. Agonizing. The mansion has a similar level where you have to run on a hamster wheel for a ridiculously long period of time. It's a nightmare. Most of the chapters aren't even worth talking about because of how forgettable they are. The Land stuff, and especially the space stuff, are just really uninteresting to me. However, there are 3 chapters before the final one that really stick out to me. First, there's Fort Francis. I'm pretty sure everyone loves this one. It's a perfect parody of internet forum culture, and the bastion of a weeaboo chameleon. It really deserves its own video. I mean, there's the infamous quote about never playing games that you can play about on the internet, but that's not even to mention the fact that he literally forces you to play a dating sim with him, or that he has memorability of characters from the first 2 Paper Mario games. It's such a fun level. The 6th chapter, Samurai's Kingdom, has an interesting feudal Japan aesthetic and premise. Similar to the Glitch Split, it's a series of successive fights. Fortunately, these ones are also broken up by the entire world ending. The entire game, there's been the threat of the void eating worlds, and Samurai's Kingdom is the first one you get to see actually destroyed in front of you. It's incredibly bleak and probably the darkest moment in any Mario game. You lost. The apocalypse happened here. It's perfectly underscored by the long silent trek through the void of nothingness that follows. Finally, there's the Underwear, which is basically the Divine Comedy in Mario. You go to hell and slowly ascend to heaven, trying to find everyone to bring the party back together one last time. Once it gets to the Over There sections, it starts to lose me, but the Underwear is really, really neat. It's a setting we haven't seen visited again in a Mario game, that being the literal afterlife, and I'd love to see it more. One of my bigger complaints about Super Paper Mario is that the Mario characters feel very tertiary to it all. It's not a super huge issue, but there comes a point when you're playing the game where, among other things, you start to wonder why it's even a Mario game in the first place. The plot doesn't really use that to its advantage after all. It's just sort of a story that happens to have Mario characters in it. Speaking of the Mario characters, they're the ones who make up your party in this game. Mario, Luigi, Peach, and Bowser. They're characterized pretty alright here. Bowser's as funny as always, and Luigi spends a good portion of the game as the enigmatic Mr. L, which is one of my favorite jokes in the Mario franchise. Peach is still essentially a non-character, and she's less interesting here than she was in the first Paper Mario yet again. Tagging along are the Pixels, who are glorified tools with no personality. They say a few lines of dialogue when you get them, then never speak again. I'm not a fan of them, but they're pretty unobtrusive. The real place this game shines in the characters department is with Count Bleck's personal rogues gallery of villains. Each one is a compelling character in their own right. Mimi is funny in its ability to shapeshift, which is cool. Ochunks' stupidity belies a tragic past. Nastasia has her own reasons for working for Count Bleck, which you unravel over the course of the game, and Dimentio is a soup of several things that you'll never really discover. The barkeeper who normally distributes lore to you doesn't even know what Dimentio is. He gives you two contradictory stories about him. Dimentio is an enigma, and I really love him as a character. He just got such a good sense of style, you know? He's written fantastically too. And now I strike like an unseen dodgeball in an echoing gymnasium? Come on, that's good. I hear a lot of people say he's just a ripoff of Kefka, but I have no idea what they're talking about. They're both clowns, I guess, but Kefka is a critique of negative nihilism, while Dimentio is just a megalomaniac. Not only that, they both play kind of different roles in the plot. Kefka is a much more active villain than Dimentio, while Dimentio sort of sits back and lets everyone do the work for him before he takes over. Kefka is also just a lot more straightforward than Dimentio, who is, as much in Super Paper Mario tends to be, confusing. They're completely different to me, despite both being clowns. As much as I love to talk about Dimentio and the rest of the villains, we had to address the elephant in the room eventually, the gameplay. Super Paper Mario is a pretty terrible game to play. Gone are the 3D environments of the original with fun turn-based combat, and in its place the weird 2D platformer thing that's super unfun. The physics feel wrong. They're so floaty and awkward. The level design is uninteresting and mostly made up of bland blocks. Every puzzle is just press this button to progress. There's nothing interesting going on with the gameplay, and that just sucks. Why does the game even have XP and levels? They don't add anything to the experience. It's a mess, and I'm not sure how it was even released in this state. You may have noticed that I haven't mentioned the game's main gimmick, which is flipping from 2D to 3D, and that's because it doesn't do anything of note in the game. It's barely even a mechanic. Going to 3D often leads to nothing interesting except an extra item or two. It's a real shame because on paper, this is one of the coolest ideas in any of the Mario RPGs. I've spoken at length about the ending of Super Paper Mario in my video about RPG endings, so all I'll say here is this. It's really good. One of my favorite endings to any game. Maybe that's just because I grew up with it, but it always manages to hit me in just the right spot. Especially as bounding through time, the culmination of all the memory themes that surround Count Bleck and Tippy's interlude relationship plays when Count Bleck and Tippy get married. However, despite me loving the ending as much as I do, that doesn't fix the huge problem that the game has at all. Super Paper Mario is a deeply flawed game. The pacing is all over the place, there's a lot of stuff that is frankly just uninteresting, and the gameplay is abysmal. However, I'm not really sure what I would change. Super Paper Mario is such a weird and inconsistent game that I feel like anything I remove would probably be a part of the game someone else really loves. It's a difficult situation. Despite me thinking it's not that great of a game, Super Paper Mario is unabashedly itself, and I'm not sure how much I should hate it for that. However, since Super Paper Mario was such a huge experiment and it didn't do very well, Nintendo and Intelligent Systems decided to course correct a little too hard on their next title in the Paper Mario series. Yeah, you know where I'm going with this. Sticker Star. One of the most infamous games of the past decade, and also one of my least favorite games of all time. While I generally don't enjoy Super Paper Mario, there's a lot about it I find interesting. Sticker Star simply has no soul. Unlike Super Paper Mario, which is so weird that it puts me at a loss for words, Sticker Star is so boring that it puts me at a loss for words. There's really nothing much to talk about here at all. The plot, world, and characters are all just hollow retreads of new Super Mario Bros. Level themes. Grass, desert, poisonous forest, snow, these are all areas from those games. Kirsty, your companion in this game, is at least a bit funny. I know a lot of people dislike her, but I find her personality charming. Examples elude me though, so it couldn't have been all that great. Sticker Star has the return of 3D environment exploration, which is actually fine here. In fact, I actually love the new direction the presentation took. It now looks even more like paper than before, whereas Super tried to essentially make the game's ditch the papery aesthetic altogether. However, I'm sure I'm not the first person to tell you that the character designs lack, well, character. They all look like the same guy. It's something that I have a lot of problems with, especially when the first 3 games have such varied and unique designs for the characters. Then there's the battle system, which is one of the worst I've ever dealt with. It's now turn-based once again, but you have a finite resource attached to your attacks. Stickers. I know a lot of people complain about there being no XP, and that's a valid criticism, but I honestly don't mind that aspect of it. I don't play RPG battles for an arbitrary reward, I do it because I think they're interesting and fun. Then again, Sticker Star just isn't fun for me since I'm constantly afraid of trying out any strategy because I'll lose the attacks I use for it permanently. Being able to run out of attacks is a horrible idea, and most of the important encounters is solved by a specific sticker anyway. I do appreciate that you can beat them without that specific sticker though, and it's not totally arbitrary locked out for you. For example, I didn't even know there was a specific sticker for the Pokey fight until I was much older than I was when I first played through the game. Maybe I'm giving the game too much credit, but it's still an aspect I think of fondly. I don't even know what there is to say about the ending of Sticker Star. In a lot of ways it harkens back to Super Mario 3D Land, which came out the year before. Bowser is bad, Mario is good, and Bowser is using Mario's power-ups against him. This is the one fight where you absolutely must bring certain stickers or you will die very easily, and I'm not a fan of that. I really wish there was more to say about it. I guess Cardboard Bowser is kind of ugly. It's odd to think that Color Splash, which I generally think is better than Sticker Star, is the only Paper Mario game I never finished. It was just as boring as Sticker Star, but by the time I got around to playing it, I had a lot less patience for boring games. With that being said, I don't really know what to tell you about it. The writing is funnier. The partner character Huey is charming. I like him. A lot of the problems with Sticker Star persist here, mainly because the battle system is the same as the one in that game. You can make your cards stronger by painting them now. You can get stronger by killing enemies and increasing your paint meter. Other than that, Color Splash is basically the same as Sticker Star in a lot of ways. I do really like some of the new characters we end up meeting. Toad Force V is really cute. There's a really poignant scene where you just talk to a shy guy on a train about the true meaning of his purpose and the morality of his job. It's a scene a lot of people point to when trying to say Color Splash is actually good, but I just don't think it's really representative of the game. I sort of glossed over Color Splash because it and Sticker Star occupy a very similar place to me. They're largely uninteresting and ultimately completely unremarkable. I don't like them at all, and I understand a lot of the criticism of them, but frankly I don't understand the absolute hatred people have for them. At least they both have Sniffitter with it. Considering my feelings on these two games, imagine my surprise when the latest Paper Mario game, the Origami King, released in 2020. Gone were almost every complaint I had of Sticker Star and Color Splash. Almost. I love the natural evolution of the presentation in this game, and the soundtrack is great. As for the gameplay, I think it's a marked improvement on the last two games. Instead of turn-based battles with consumables, now turn-based battles with an interesting ring system. Each battle feels like a puzzle you have to solve. It's really, really fun. I love having to figure out each and every one, and each area has different enemies that play with it in different ways, like the boos in the desert who disappear, making it hard to remember where they were when you manipulate the board, or the foldable origami soldiers that you have to collapse into themselves by moving the board. The bosses are also pretty great. You have to figure out a way to get to them in order to damage them. My personal favorite are the various Valumentals, which are origami creatures that defend the planet's elements. You have to figure out specific and interesting strategies for each one, like the Ice Valumental who creates a huge ice mage for you to traverse that I totally didn't just screenshot. A lot of people give the game shit for having villains that are just arts and crafts supplies, but I think that they really play well into different personalities these arts and crafts supplies can have. My favorite of these are the Scissors, because they act like a dramatic anime villain with how they describe their limiters coming off and everything. It's really fun and funny. Origami King has a much more distinct focus on the world building of its locales than the last three games did. It feels incredibly cohesive, locations are often referenced by others, and it certainly helps that there's an interconnected map once again. Ideas presented throughout the game about stuff like Shangri-Spa or the Valumentals or that Pharaoh Toad keep coming up, and it's really, really cool how it all just comes together in the end. All of this is aided by the fact that this plot has several memorable moments and characters throughout it. I'm sure Bobby the Bob-omb needs no introduction. Despite his weak character design, he's a more interesting character to me than most of the party members in the first three games. He thematically fits the role of foil to Ollie, even if it's not utilized to its full potential. The fact that he dies for good is great and really shows just how beautiful but fragile life is. Bobby lived a full life and sacrificed himself to protect the people he cared about during it. Ollie, the main villain, meanwhile, wants to destroy all life because he was tarnished by his creator. He tries to take it out on everyone just because one person scribbled on him. I've said it before, but it's basically Final Fantasy IX for babies. The ideas presented here are very similar. Ultimately, it's a game about coming to terms with your own death. And I think it's a really powerful through line for this game, even if it's much more blunt and less complicated than something like Final Fantasy IX or Everhood. It's one of my favorite Mario stories. Unfortunately, not much but Bobby and Ollie really contribute to this. But the rest is fun enough that I don't mind, and in some sense, that's a contribution in and of itself. Showing you these wonderful experiences along the way is a great means for the message to be explained subtextually. Live your life to the fullest and see the beautiful things the world has to offer. I particularly love the section where you go to a movie theater theme park hybrid and help out the people who work there. It's a really unique setting for a Mario game and reminds me of when Paper Mario used to be more adventurous with its level themes. There's an ocean and temple here that are essentially just Wind Waker parodies too. You have to chart a course with sea charts and go through a tower that has you doing trials of courage, wisdom, and power. That stuff directly lifted from that game. It's really cute. Paper Mario the Origami King might not be my favorite game in the series. That will always be the original Paper Mario. I do think that I like it more than most people do, at least. I know I like it more than Super Paper Mario, that's for sure. It's consistent, it's charming, and it's occasionally really brilliant. Its battles are clever puzzle boxes, the plot is poetic and full of interesting ideas about mortality, and the characters and situations are fun. It's really interesting that something like this came out of modern Paper Mario, and hopefully it signals a change in the series going forward. Paper Mario is an interesting series of games. The only other series I can think of that changes its identity this frequently is Sonic the Hedgehog, and we all know how people view that. The first two games are pretty solid, the third game is weird and ambitious to a fault, the third to last and penultimate games are too safe, and the last game is also pretty solid in different ways. It's a series that's hard to discuss holistically, but most importantly, it's just fun. Even in some of the worst games here, the writing is consistently sharp, the presentation is consistently on point. Paper Mario is a good time, and its variability means there's something for everyone here. I know that no matter what direction the series takes after this, I'll be sure to be keeping up to date on it, because Origami King has proven to me that a Paper Mario can deviate from the formulas of the first two games and still be something that I enjoy, and really I can't ask for more from these games. This has been Arcade Everlasting, Master of Illusions and Pleaser of Crowds, signing off. Thank you for watching.